Yeah, the whole system implementation I'm thinking of in terms of the demographic diversities. You know, if you have a decision that's made by a bunch of white guys, uh, the women and the black people or non-white people are going to be less interested in helping out. You know, there's less buy-in uh, to whatever they come up with. There's a sense of legitimacy. If I see my kind of person involved in it, it has more legitimacy to me than if I don't see my kind of person involved. And likewise with stakeholders, this part of the sense of why a stakeholder, if you're getting a full range of stakeholders from a particular issue, the people who are fighting it out, people who have power or money or knowledge, whatever, you get everybody in who's involved. To the extent you get all those interests and resources involved, and they create the decision, they're going to carry it out. The whole system will be involved in making it happen, rather than one piece of the system trying to push it on the rest of the system. So the more diversity you have, the more buy-in you have into actually implementing it. And general resilience is from sustainability, ecological. If you have 30 different kinds of corn that you're raising and some blight comes along that kills one of them, you still have all these other corn. If you don't have that diversity and the blight comes and wipes out your corn, you have no corn. People are talking about that happening with bananas now, because there's hardly any diversity. Bananas have been weeded down to the most productive, enjoyable form of banana, and if something came along that wiped out that, we would no longer have bananas. You know, so the food things and human diversity. If you only have intellectuals, you're not going to get anything done. You know, if you only have people who are you know, the workers, you're not going to get, you know, they can get stuff done as long as nothing changes, but then you need the intellectuals to help think through what's going to happen next if things change. So the sense of being hit, we don't know what's going to hit us. The more diversity we have involved in making our decisions, the better the chances that we'll have the kinds of people we need in order to deal with whatever hits us. So that's the general resilience. That's the three things that I put into that part of it.
Wow, great.
And the only other one is the emergent differences, is when 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, 1,000 people are talking, even if they all look the same at the beginning. You know, you get married with this person you think is so much like you, and then all these emergent differences show up. So to welcome the emergent differences and then use it creatively is as important as having diverse people at the beginning. So that's another dimension of diversity. Specifics, but I have written about some, and one of them was on the Great Peace March, and I'm going to pick a different example than the one in my prologue. But there was a conflict over dress code. You know, we had conservative people and wild, punky people on our march. And there was one guy who was gay, cross-dresser, and he wore skirts all the time on the march. And the older conservative people were very upset because he was endangering our PR image. We were about nuclear disarmament. What's he doing wearing a dress, distracting from our main issue? We're talking about trying to keep the world from blowing up. What are you doing wearing a dress? And they tried to get a dress code passed to regulate the march. And in protest, a whole pile of really He-Man kind of guys who were engineers on the march taking care of our vehicles borrowed dresses from their girlfriends and walked in solidarity with this skinny little gay guy. And the poor conservative people were going out of their minds, like, what are you doing this for? This is exactly wrong. And what ended up happening was a bunch of circles where people talked about it, and included people. It was at a stop. We did these at a particular stop, and people from the community had come into our encampment, our Peace City, and some of them were in a circle. And there's a write-up on my website about what happened in the circle, which was people acting totally contrary to what you'd expect given who they were. There was a punk anarchist Peace March board member who said we really should, be more conscious of our appearance. He's got the mohawk and a ring and all that, but he's thinking about this. It's important. And then there's a woman who came all dressed to kill, and she comes and she said, my mother thinks you're all a bunch of communists who go to Russia, and I came to learn about nuclear war, and I find you talking about clothes. It's like all strange stuff. And out of that came the decision to, when we went to a church or a school to talk about the issue, one punk and one conservative elder would go. And they say, we have nothing in common, except we don't want the world to blow up. And we want to tell you about that. And show you, so using that diversity in this powerful way instead of dividing ourselves with it. That's a great, a great example. Cognitive diversity for collective wisdom. There are good examples for that in what's her name's book, Helene Landemore's book. She has one where there's a lot of crime on this bridge in this Connecticut town, and the cops, the cops are the experts on crime, and they have, put more cop watches on the bridge. But they had a bunch of ordinary citizens who were brought in and who had various experts, public officials and cops and whatever talking. And I can't remember what the solution was that they came up with. It was a radically different solution from what the cops had. And so there's examples there, and she analyzes how the cognitive diversity of the group created that. And the movie 12 Angry Men, you familiar with that movie? So that movie is another example, and she says it's not just that one guy who stood out and sort of changed everybody's direction, because he was learning things also from what people were saying. None of those people by themselves would have ever come up with the reasoned decision that they came up with afterwards. So that's a really good example of cognitive diversity, isn't that?